One of the ones that got my attention to start with was Gartner coming out with both a press release and a note basically saying 30% of generative AI projects will be uh, basically canceled after the proof of concept. Basically, they are starting to realize that generative AI projects are sometimes half baked and will be abandoned as companies are starting to figure out the reality of what they need to do.
Well, first of all, you're on your own this week. I'm just going to sit and listen because I spent all week just watching the Olympics, so I really no idea that there was any news going on whatsoever. No, just playing on that. I wish I actually had. I finally got to watch some over this weekend and thoroughly enjoyed it and got into it a lot. But okay, so Gartner, as usual. This is if I was a marketing guy, I would make this their tagline. It's like we state the obvious and act like it's groundbreaking analysis. It's like, welcome to the party, pals. Yeah,
Mhm.
we've been talking about this for a long time that these Gen AI projects are in for some rough goes. We're going to talk about some additional reporting that we're seeing right now, reinforcing that. Um, and I think almost shocking insofar as um, one of the clear indicators is how long it takes any of this stuff to come to fruition. And we have this, as we've talked about, this massive mismatch between the speed of innovation and the sort of explosion of innovation, particularly around generative AI, and the relatively glacial pace of deployment within any enterprise for any technology. And so this is one of those where we got a whole lot of bell ringing that happened, a whole lot of people doing proof of concepts, a whole lot of people throwing money at things to show like that they're moving forward. Um, but that when you start weighing this against actual cost and value, it's can be very difficult to justify across a whole number of dimensions, particularly when you just look at how many irons are in the fire for a typical CIO or an enterprise IT organization today. So I think the 30%, only 30% is would actually be a good thing if 70% of POCs move forward. I think in this day and age, with as truly experimental as it still is, I think that would actually be positive. But the last my last little comment on this, and the only thing I found in this report that was truly like not head scratching, like what are they thinking, like made me think, was the numbers that they Gartner are assigning in terms of cost to these projects, like staggering numbers on so they break down like a table, and if you look at the report or the press release
Mhm.
of the different approaches, and like even when they're saying that you modify an existing LLM and like tune it to your needs, they're estimating a cost of 8 to 11,000 per user per year. That is a staggering cost. I don't know where they got the
Yes.
number. If that's anywhere close to true, no one's ever going to do any of this. I mean, that is just shockingly big numbers that they are estimating. And that was the only thing that was surprising to me in this report, because if those numbers are true, if that's really what this is costing, then the hill to climb to an ROI and a return on these AI investments for an enterprise is substantially higher than I was thinking.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about this a bit later about how even trying to justify $20 or $30 a month per employee is tough. But if the actual number is $1,000 per month, you've got to have some real value that is very easy to articulate and very easy to turn into a dollar sign to justify any sort of investment along those lines. And it's not a secret that if you are trying to do generative AI and customize it to your company in any ways, it quickly becomes $1 million investment. That's just the cost of talent plus compute plus testing plus all the data wrangling that goes on. That's just the reality. But 30% seems such a low percentage to me because we've talked about the data science world for some time now, where it is very common for 80 to 90% of proof of concepts to not move forward into production. And honestly, part of that is the experimental process of figuring out whether something should work. You should have a failure rate when you are working with new technologies and figure out at the proof of concept level that something's not going to go on. That is actually not a failure of the process to say that only half
Yeah.
of projects end up going through. In fact, it's better if you cut it off at that proof of concept phase rather than spend additional millions of dollars trying to push into production when you shouldn't be. So I don't think that 30% or 50% or even higher is necessarily bad. I just think that setting 30% as the line seems extremely conservative and almost it's like a no-brainer. Like it's like saying that hitters will miss the ball 30% of the time when you have a 300 batting average, 30% is your average hit rate. Like you're going to miss 70% of the time. That's the reality. And probably AI is kind of like baseball in that regard, that your good batting average might be 300, 30% of that your
Well, I mean,
success.
yeah, I mean, I did find it interesting. This article sort of positioned this like a bad thing, like, oh my gosh, how horrible that we're only going to see a 30%, or we're going to see 30% of these fail. And it is, I do find that shocking because, like like we talked about, because of the experimental nature of this, it should be higher. If it's not higher, then you're playing it way too safe with a technology that demands testing and experimentation and putting it out there and seeing what happens. And so, I think there, again, so many things are misguided around this and sort of how they're looking at it, I think. But, going back to the price part for me, so they have this table that talks about the various use cases, and I guess they're considering the different approaches. So they have everything from like a commercial Gen AI app on the low end side to building your own custom models from scratch at the sort of high end. And you mentioned $1 million, and calling a spade for a large enterprise, $1 million is not a big investment. We've talked about these numbers. We talked about Databricks and Snowflake talking about $10 million to build an LLM, and we're going, that's not that much money for these big companies. So that's not the number that shocked me when they're looking at these upfront costs, which all range from 100,000 to as much as 20 million for these big custom models. But in that context, we're talking about a custom model that is now built for a very specific use case that ostensibly is driving a tremendous amount of organizational value. But then when they put this recurring per user per year cost for the custom models, they're saying $11,000 to $21,000 per user per year. Those are just shockingly big numbers. And so now when you start replicating, who knows exactly how they're defining a user in that context, but that makes this arguably prohibitive across any dimension. And so like I said, I'm really curious where they came up with those numbers. And I think this is, if I'm a CIO reading this report, the big aha for me is I need to dig very deep into my cost structures as I look at these projects to truly understand that ROI, that potential. Because if we see these kind of cost overruns, and they're talking on a an exponential factor to what we saw with cloud, and we saw what happened with cloud, where people weren't going in their eyes wide open and could get themselves in a whole ton of trouble with crazy cost overruns with cloud. AI, it looks like it could be 10 times worse if these numbers are anywhere close.
Right. And for me, I think from a common sense perspective, there are probably three big buckets that I would be most concerned about. The first is around data. How quickly do you need to bring in new data, update it, change it, put in the metadata, all of that good stuff. The second is around the model itself and how often it needs to be updated and fine-tuned on a year-to-year basis to continue getting good results. And then probably the third is around UX, how quickly the job itself changes. And all three of these need to be taken into account pretty seriously. And there's some other subsidiary things around training and the additional talent you might need. But I think of kind of data, model, UX, all as being three categories, that could have a lot of cost potentially, depending on the rate of change that exists in your company. And yes, that can be extremely prohibitive because just thinking about 10K per person, any large enterprise has 5K, 10K, 20K, 50K people. That becomes a wild amount of money to start spending on AI.
Crazy.